I was halfway through my lunch when my phone vibrated against the wooden table. The restaurant smelled like grilled rosemary chicken and fresh bread, my daughter's signature dishes. Every detail around me was proof that at least one thing in my life had gone right. The place was full. Soft jazz played in the background. My daughter moved between tables with confidence, smiling like someone who believed the world was fair. I used to believe that too. I had just lifted my fork when I saw the caller ID. Mark Benson, my neighbor. My stomach tightened before I even answered. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice calm. There was a pause on the other end. Then he spoke quietly, almost carefully. "Hey, I don't know how to say this," Mark said, "but why is there a moving truck outside your house?" The fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the plate. "A moving truck," I repeated. "Yeah," he said, "2 of them, and your brother's car is parked out front." My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it in my ears. "That's impossible," I said. "I didn't authorize anything." Another pause, longer this time. "Well," Mark continued, lowering his voice, "they're loading furniture. Your study desk, the painting your wife loved, and," he hesitated, "they changed the locks." The restaurant suddenly felt too loud, too bright. I looked around and realized I couldn't feel my hands anymore. My brother, the same man who had stood beside me at my wife's funeral and sworn he'd look out for me, the same man who helped me manage my finances when grief made it hard to think straight, the same man I trusted with power of attorney, temporarily, or so I believed. "I'm sorry," Mark said gently. "I thought you should know." I ended the call without another word. Across the room, my daughter caught my eye and waved, proud and hopeful. I forced a smile back at her, even as something cold and sharp settled in my chest. I already knew what this meant. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a move. For months, small things had gone missing. Documents misfiled, bank statements delayed, questions answered with smiles instead of facts. I told myself I was being paranoid. That family wouldn't betray family. That lie tasted worse than anything on the plate in front of me. I slowly stood up, straightened my jacket, and left cash on the table untouched. As I walked out, one thought burned through my mind with terrifying clarity. They didn't just steal my house. They thought they had erased me. By the time I reached my street, the moving trucks were already gone. My house, stood there quietly, like it had no idea it had just betrayed me. The front door looked the same, but something felt wrong. When I stepped onto the porch and turned my key, it didn't fit. I tried again. Nothing. That's when the truth finally stopped whispering and started screaming. I rang the doorbell. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened halfway, and there he was. My brother, Daniel. He looked calm, too calm, like a man who had rehearsed this moment in his head and finally reached the last line of the script. "Oh," he said lightly, "you're back early. Why are the locks changed?" I asked. He sighed as if I were the inconvenience. "We need to talk." "No," I said. "You need to open the door." He stepped outside and closed it behind him. That small action, cutting me off from my own home, felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "You signed the papers," Daniel said. "Everything's legal." I signed temporary authority. I shot back. "For bill payments, medical decisions." "Not this." He smiled then, not a friendly smile, a tight one. "You should have read the fine print." My ears rang. "What did you do?" He pulled out a folder from under his arm and handed it to me. Deed transfers, asset reallocations, trust amendments, all stamped, all notarized, all done while I was drowning in grief and barely sleeping. "You moved everything," I whispered. "Not everything," he corrected. "Just what made sense." "What made sense?" My voice cracked. This was my wife's house. This was meant to go to my daughter. Daniel's expression hardened. "Your daughter has a restaurant now. She's fine. You were becoming a liability." A liability. I stared at him, seeing flashes of the past replay in my mind. Late-night conversations where he urged me to rest. Emails he insisted on handling for me. The way he discouraged me from hiring a lawyer. Every step had been calculated. "You planned this?" I said. He didn't deny it. "Someone had to take control," he replied. "And honestly, you weren't strong enough." For a moment, I thought I might lose it right there. "Yell? Swing? Beg?" But something unexpected happened instead. I went quiet. Because beneath the shock, beneath the rage, something else was forming, something colder and far more dangerous. "I want my personal items," I said evenly. Daniel nodded. I boxed what I thought was appropriate. "You can pick it up tomorrow." Appropriate. I turned and walked back to my car without another word. My hands were shaking, but my mind was suddenly sharp, clearer than it had been in months. As I drove away, I realized something important. Daniel didn't just steal from me. He underestimated me, and that would be his biggest mistake. That night, sleep never came. I sat at the small kitchen table in my temporary apartment, the one Daniel had kindly arranged for me, staring at the folder until the papers blurred together. The place smelled like fresh paint and emptiness. No memories on the walls. No history. Just silence pressing in from every corner. I kept replaying the moment he closed the door in my face. Not the anger, that was easy. It was the humiliation that burned. I had trusted him. Trusted him with my finances, my signature, my weakest moments. After my wife died, Daniel stepped in smoothly, confidently. He spoke in calm tones when my mind felt like static. He said things like, "You don't need to worry about this anymore. I've got you." And I let him. That realization hurt more than losing the house. I walked to the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at me. Older, thinner, eyes shadowed with guilt and disbelief. How did I miss it? The answer was simple, and brutal grief had made me careless, and love had made me blind. My phone buzzed. A message from my daughter. "Dad, did you leave already? Everything okay?" I typed deleted, typed again. "Just tired. I'll explain soon." I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Not yet. The house was supposed to be hers one day. The thought of her finding out that her uncle had stripped it away like it meant nothing made my chest tighten. That's when doubt crept in. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I'd already lost. For a few dangerous minutes, I almost convinced myself to let it go. Start over. Live smaller. Stay quiet. That voice sounded reasonable. Safe. And then I remembered my wife. Her laughter in that house. The way she used to say, "Don't let anyone decide your worth for you." The night she made me promise I'd always protect what we built, for our daughter. I slammed my hand on the table. "No," I said aloud. I wasn't broken. I was wounded. And wounds heal, sometimes into something sharper. I opened my laptop and began reading every document carefully this time. Line by line, footnote by footnote. I noticed things I'd missed before. Dates that overlapped strangely. Signatures witnessed by the same two names again and again. Patterns. Daniel thought I was finished because I was quiet. But quiet isn't surrender, it's observation. By dawn, the grief had transformed into something steadier. Purpose. Focus. I finally understood the truth of what had happened, not just legally, but emotionally. Daniel didn't just take my property. He tried to rewrite my role in my own life. And that was something I would never forgive. By the third morning, I stopped reacting and started planning. That single clause I'd highlighted kept replaying in my head. It was buried deep in the trust amendment, written in language meant to discourage anyone from reading past the bold headers. Daniel had counted on that. He always liked shortcuts when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. But the clause was clear. Any transfer made under undue influence, especially during a documented period of mental distress, could be challenged. Not easily, not quickly, but fatally if proven. And Daniel had left fingerprints everywhere. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn him. Instead, I did something far more dangerous. I listened. I pulled phone records, emails, old voice messages I'd ignored before. I requested medical documentation from the weeks after my wife died, the insomnia, the medication changes, the notes where doctors described me as emotionally compromised. Then I hired someone Daniel didn't know, a forensic accountant. I met her in a quiet cafe across town, the kind with no music and no regulars. She didn't waste time on sympathy. "If he moved assets this fast," she said, scrolling through numbers. "Got sloppy somewhere." That word, sloppy, felt like oxygen. Over the next 2 weeks, we uncovered things Daniel assumed were invisible. Small transfers routed through shell accounts. Property taxes paid from the wrong source. A notarized signature dated on a day I was hospitalized. Every discovery tightened the knot around him and loosened the one around me. At night, doubt still tried to creep in. I'd sit alone and wonder if I was going too far. If this would tear the family apart beyond repair. Then I'd remember him calling me a liability. That word became fuel. I also prepared emotionally. That part was harder. Revenge isn't just strategy, it's restraint. Knowing when not to move. When to let someone believe they've already won. I practiced my silence. When Daniel texted asking if I was justing okay, I replied politely. When he suggested dinner, to clear the air, I declined calmly. When he bragged subtly about taking on more responsibility, I congratulated him. Each response lowered his guard. Meanwhile, I met with a lawyer who specialized in trust litigation. I didn't tell him everything at once. I let him ask questions, watch the pieces fall into place on his own. When he finally leaned back and said he overreached, I knew I was ready. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about timing. Daniel believed the story was over. I knew we were only reaching the first turning point. The first move wasn't loud. That was the point. Daniel expected anger, court threats, emotional outbursts. He was prepared for noise. What he wasn't prepared for was silence paired with action. The lawyer filed the initial petition on a Tuesday morning. Strategic, my attorney said. Judges were sharper early in the week, less tolerant of nonsense. The filing itself didn't accuse Daniel of theft outright. That would come later. Instead, it questioned process, capacity, influence, procedure, boring words, dangerous implications. I imagined Daniel opening the envelope at his office, skimming it with confidence, then slowing down as certain phrases jumped out. Undue influence, medical vulnerability, temporary authority exceeded. That image kept me calm. 2 days later, the accountant triggered the second move. A formal inquiry quietly submitted to the bank Daniel used for his management accounts. Not an accusation, just a request for clarification on transaction origins tied to a trust under review. Banks hate uncertainty. They freeze first and ask questions later. By Friday afternoon, Daniel called me. His voice sounded different, still controlled, but thinner. Why didn't you come to me? He asked. I leaned back in my chair. About what? This legal nonsense, he snapped. You're embarrassing yourself. And me. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Funny. You didn't come to me before changing my locks. Silence. You're overreacting, he said finally. This could have been handled privately, like you handled it, I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. You don't understand how this works, Daniel said. I've already moved things around. Undoing it would be messy. Messy for who? I asked softly. He didn't answer. That told me everything. Over the next week, small things began to shift. Daniel's assistant stopped returning calls. A mutual friend casually mentioned Daniel was dealing with paperwork issues. The restaurant supplier my daughter used, owned by a company Daniel partially controlled, suddenly reinstated a contract he'd quietly canceled months earlier. He was feeling pressure. Not enough to panic, enough to make mistakes. I ran into him unexpectedly at a family gathering, my niece's birthday. He greeted me with exaggerated warmth, arm around my shoulder, voice loud enough for others to hear. Good to see you out and about, he said, looking better. I met his eyes. So are you. Though you seem tired. His smile faltered for half a second. That was when I knew. The balance of power had shifted. Daniel still thought he could negotiate his way out of this. Charm, intimidation, delay. He didn't realize the groundwork was already laid, and that I was no longer reacting. I was directing. The meeting happened in a glass conference room downtown. Too bright, too clean, the kind of place where people pretend the truth won't stain the walls. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late. That alone told me he was rattled. He shook hands with everyone except me, sat across the table, straightened his tie, and spoke like a man still clinging to authority. This is all a misunderstanding, he said. We're family. These transfers were done to protect assets during a difficult time. The banker didn't nod. The lawyer didn't interrupt. They just listened. And then it was my turn. I'd like to clarify the timeline, I said calmly, sliding copies of documents across the table. This transfer was executed on March 14th. On that same date, I was admitted overnight for acute insomnia and medication side effects. That's documented. Daniel shifted in his chair. And this signature, I continued, tapping the page, was notarized by someone who notarized 12 other documents for Daniel Benson that month, most of them involving the same shell entities. The Runial leaned forward. You're twisting coincidences into accusations. I looked at him. Really looked. No, I said. I'm lining them up. His lawyer cleared his throat. We should take a break. But it was already too late. The banker spoke next. Mr. Benson, until this is resolved, all related accounts will remain frozen. Daniel's face drained of color. You can't do that, he snapped. We already have, the banker replied evenly. For the first time, I saw fear break through Daniel's composure. Not panic yet, but calculation had replaced confidence. After the meeting, he followed me into the hallway. You're enjoying this? he said quietly. I stopped walking. No, I replied. I'm correcting it. You think you'll win? He scoffed. Even if you get some of it back, you'll destroy what's left of this family. I met his gaze. You already did that. I'm just making it visible. He stepped closer. Drop this. We can work something out. I shook my head. That option ended when you locked me out of my own home. His jaw tightened. You were weak, he said. I did what you couldn't. I leaned in just enough for him to hear me clearly. You mistook grief for weakness. That's a mistake men like you don't survive professionally. I walked away before he could respond. Later that evening, my lawyer called. They've requested mediation, he said. Quietly. I closed my eyes. Mediation meant Daniel was bleeding, slowly internally, but still hoping to control the damage. He didn't realize something crucial. I wasn't after a settlement. I was after the truth on record. The fallout hit faster than I expected. Daniel's lawyer tried to spin the mediation as a compromise, but the bank freeze and the forensic accountant's findings had already sound panic. Word spread quietly through our social circles, business associates, mutual friends, even some distant family. Whispers of mismanagement and questionable transfers made it to Daniel before I even wanted them to. I watched it happen from a distance, maintaining my calm facade. People who had once looked up to him, the same ones who had nodded at his every decision, now paused when he spoke. I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. That small hesitation was a victory I didn't celebrate aloud, but it fueled a cold satisfaction deep inside. Daniel tried to strike back. Emails, phone calls, threats veiled as suggestions. He tried to intimidate the bank, manipulate his allies, even appeal to my daughter, suggesting I was own-hind. But I had prepared for every contingency. Each move he made was countered quietly, legally, ruthlessly. No public fights. No dramatic outbursts, just pressure. Steady, unrelenting, and methodical. The house. It stayed locked under the court's jurisdiction. Daniel's attempt to sell it collapsed under scrutiny. The neighbors, the ones who had once smiled politely at him, began asking questions, small, pointed questions. And those questions were a mirror reflecting every lie he had told, every act of betrayal he had committed. Emotionally, I wasn't unscathed. Nights were still long, and grief still whispered in corners. But the rage that had once burned wildly inside me had turned into something more useful focus. I had learned how much damage could be done by blind trust, and I had learned the cost of letting someone else dictate my fate. Even my daughter noticed the change. She didn't ask questions. She just watched me with that quiet admiration reserved for people who suddenly seemed stronger than the world. And I realized, in that moment, the revenge wasn't just about Daniel. It was about reclaiming my identity, my power, and my dignity. Daniel tried one last desperate move, a public accusation designed to humiliate me, but the evidence, the documents, the witnesses, and my lawyer's meticulous strategy left him exposed. The whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to conversations, and finally, a quiet acknowledgement he had lost. Not just the property, not just the money, but the moral ground he had assumed was his by birthright. And yet, victory didn't feel like joy. It felt like a heavy, necessary burden lifted. The injustice had been answered, yes, but at a cost that no one outside of me would fully understand. The betrayal had scarred me in ways that would never entirely fade, but it had also taught me something invaluable: vigilance, patience, and strategy are often stronger than brute force. Months passed after the court's final ruling. The house remained in my name, the assets returned, and Daniel quietly receded from our lives. He didn't fight publicly anymore. The whispers of his misdeeds had traveled farther than any court order could. Friends, neighbors, even distant relatives began treating him differently, hesitant, cautious, almost fearful. And I finally felt the weight of the storm lift, even if the scars remained. Walking into the house one quiet evening, I ran my fingers along the furniture. My furniture, items that Daniel had tried to claim as if history could be rewritten. The walls still held the echoes of laughter and love, of memories that he had no right to erase. I allowed myself to breathe fully for the first time in nearly a year. I had fought not just for what was mine, but for the memory of my wife, the future of my daughter, and my own dignity. The revenge had been calculated, silent, and deliberate. I had watched Daniel's empire crumble under his own arrogance and the meticulous truth we'd assembled. But victory wasn't satisfying in the way I had imagined. It wasn't a roaring celebration or a final, dramatic confrontation. It was quiet, measured, and introspective. I realized that revenge at its core isn't about punishment. It's about reclaiming yourself from those who thought they could rewrite your life. My daughter joined me in the kitchen that evening, carrying her notebook filled with new recipes and ideas for the restaurant. She smiled, unaware of the full depth of what had transpired but sensing the calm strength that now radiated from me. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. I nodded. "Better than okay," I said. "We're okay." And I meant it. I knew Daniel would linger somewhere in the background, a reminder of human weakness and betrayal, but he no longer had power over me. The lesson, painful and unforgettable, had been learned: trust wisely, act strategically, and never underestimate the capacity for one's own resilience. In the end, revenge had been more than restitution. It had been a mirror. It revealed what I had allowed, what I had endured, and ultimately what I was capable of becoming when backed into a corner by treachery. The house, the assets, even Daniel's reputation were only external victories. The true triumph was internal, reclaiming control over my life, my choices, and my future. I had been betrayed, yes, but I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more vigilant. Many ending cliffhangers. I stood by the window that night, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, and whispered quietly to myself, "Let this be the last time anyone underestimates me." Moral reflection. Betrayal can break trust, but it doesn't have to break you. True revenge is not about destruction. It is about reclaiming your power, your dignity, and your life.